Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's on-demand session. Today, we've pulled together some content from Bank of America's Career Lab library, and we're super excited to share it with you. Content that we've pulled together today is some of our favorite information that we like to share with current college students who might be pursuing internship opportunities or perhaps even full-time opportunities. It's just really some of the most useful content that we think is helpful for anyone who's about to begin the transition from campus into beginning their career. So to introduce myself, my name's Steven. I'm a member of the campus recruiting team here at Bank of America, and I work with a group of folks who work year-round to help recruit for our summer internship programs, a majority of which convert into full-time positions and really are the primary pipeline for anyone who's interested in beginning a full-time career with us. With that said, we do hire a variety of full-time positions as well. So when we get to the end of this presentation, if you're thinking about potentially submitting an application to work with Bank of America, we'll have lots of good tips and pointers for how you can get started. So why don't we go ahead and move into some of the content. And before we get into the details, I will lay out for you some of the information that we do plan to cover today is going to give you an overview of how Bank of America, similar to many other large corporations, will structure their roles and how you can determine what might be the best fit based on your interests and skill sets for opportunities that a company might be hiring for. Beyond that, we'll take a closer look at what the hiring process tends to look like for most companies. And then we'll get more granular and talk about some things that you should keep in mind as you begin the hiring process and how you can successfully navigate the interview process. And we'll end, like I said, with some pointers on how you can actually get started. So when it comes to finding your fit, this is a useful spreadsheet that we like to use. What we did was we did an exercise where we looked across our company and we asked some of the folks who'd gone through our entry-level campus programs to identify some of the traits that successful candidates for their group tend to exhibit along the way. So if you think about how large Bank of America, for instance, is, the types of roles that we hire for is a very long list. So in addition to what you might be familiar with us with the consumer bank, where there's a branch location where you might show up with your ATM card, withdraw money from your personal account. You may also know us as a wealth management company, also dealing with individuals who are trying to build their generational wealth. You might know us as a large investment bank dealing with really large corporate clients. And behind all of that are a number of roles that actually make it all come together. So technology and operations, various corporate functions like human resources where I work. So the reality is that there's a really broad variety of career paths that may not be top of mind. And so it's really important, to take a moment at the beginning of the process to start doing your research and narrowing down your short list of where it is you think you might be a fit. So back to the slide, these three pillars that we have here are great because it might help you self-identify with the area that might be the best fit for you. The first column that we see here it's a profile that we describe as big thinkers. And so these are folks who tend to be tech-focused. They identify as builders who are able to translate information and turn that into design. They're innovative thinkers who are able to provide creative solutions. And they're also very collaborative team players. So they work really well with folks who might be outside of their immediate team and you kind of operate across the business and organization. So someone who fits that profile may be a good fit for a career in technology and operations. The second pillar that you'll see here are market makers. So these are folks who are quantitatively driven, who have excellent interpersonal skills and can be very client-focused. They like to focus on industry trends. They're also very markets-focused and understanding financial news. They're meticulous and detail-oriented, and they're also able to communicate the big picture effectively. And so this is a combination between being very quantitatively minded, but then also being a really strong communicator and bringing other people along with you to understand the data that you know so well. And so this is a good candidate profile for someone pursuing a role in a banking and markets role. And then the third profile over to the far right here are folks who would describe themselves as decision makers. So these are people who are problem solvers, they're trusted consultants, they're persuasive communicators with the ability to influence others. They're able to synthesize and analyze large amounts of data without losing sight of the big picture, and they can perform a quick analysis and make quick decisions. This profile tends to work most effectively within a corporate function. And so if you're thinking of which areas that might entail beyond HR, we can advance one more slide and take a closer look at some of the programs that you might find within each of those three pillars. So if you identified as a big thinker, a market maker, or a decision maker, these might be three potential lists that will help you narrow down where you can start your search. And again, all of the content that I'm sharing with you today will be specific to how Bank of America is structured and the programs that we hire for. But hopefully this is universally applicable. So you can take this and really use it in your search no matter where you decide to apply. I will point out, across different organizations, Bank of America, we're very lucky to be such a large organization. And so our campus programs are very broadly defined. And we're able to extend internship opportunities not just to undergraduate students, but also to students pursuing an MBA, and in some cases a PhD. And the great thing about being able to have really robust campus programs is that we also offer experiences to rotate between different parts of our business too, which can be a really valuable experience when you're really early in your career. All right, so let's take a closer look at what the recruitment process itself tends to look like. And we'll get started just by walking through this quick timeline that breaks down the process from the very beginning all the way through to the interview and offer stage. So in 5 simple steps, really, the process is best described by you getting started at the stage where you're at right now. So attending info sessions, whether virtual or in person, is a great way to get to know more about an employer, what they're hiring for, and even get to experience a little bit about their culture. It's also really that stage that we just talked about where you're kind of ruling out which programs maybe you're not going to apply for and narrowing down and curating your list of the programs where you think you're going to be the best candidate. So the second step is once you've narrowed down that list, you feel prepared and ready to submit the application. You make sure that you submit your application along with the timing that's going to make you a most competitive candidate. All right, so we'll talk about timing for our programs a little bit later, but our programs are opening up on July 1st. And so that's where it's really important to make sure that if applications are opening in July for internships the following summer, you don't want to show up and be applying at the end of the application window. So if you were just submitting your application in October and everyone else started submitting applications in July, that's going to put you at a disadvantage. And so you really want to do your research to know when applications are opening so that you can be one of the earliest applicants. And it's a great way to demonstrate your readiness and your interest in a role. So the third step here is, let's say you submit your application, the team of recruiters and business representatives agrees that you're a great fit. The next step is for you to be advanced to a first-round interview. And Bank of America, along with a number of other large corporations, uses a tool called HireVue. And it's actually becoming more and more common, I think, in this virtual recruiting environment that we're in, because this tool lets companies use pre-recorded video interviews. And so that's a little bit different than a tool like Skype or FaceTime, where you're having a live two-way communication with your evaluator or your interviewer. This is a little bit different. So what happens is you log into the portal when you're invited to do the interview. You'll have about 72 hours to complete the interview, and you'll be asked a series of questions. It tends to be somewhere around 5 questions, and you get about 3 minutes to record yourself responding to each question. And after you've submitted your answers and your responses, what will happen is the video will be sent over to the hiring managers or the team of folks who you're actually interviewing to work with. So real live people, professionals, will be reviewing your submission, and it may not necessarily just be the recruiter. It may also be someone actually doing the role. So that's helpful to know just for context before you actually get to this stage. So after the first round, after you've completed a successful hire review video, you'll be invited to a final round. And the final rounds are usually held in person, but in this virtual environment, which you can expect for some time now, is we'll likely continue to conduct final round interviews virtually. But it'll be different than the first round because we'll use a tool that will let us do live two-way communication. And so we tend to use WebEx for those meetings, if not over the phone. And other employers might use a similar platform as well. So if you're familiar with Zoom or Microsoft Teams or maybe even BlueJeans, that's the kind of tool that companies will use most often to conduct live two-way interviews. And so that's really where the process ends. And after you've completed that live two-way communication, you will receive an offer. Depending on the program that you've applied for, the deadlines might vary. Generally, for all of our programs, we offer about 2 weeks for candidates to think about it. And during that 2 weeks, it's really up to the candidate to ask any questions they want to know. I know the recruiting team here is always very happy to answer whatever questions a candidate might have who's been successful all the way through the process to this point. But it really is a great opportunity just to make sure that you feel really good about the offer and you're confident in the decision before accepting. So take a look further into the process here and answer a couple of questions. So what does Bank of America look for in a candidate? And I'll try to provide an additional lens here so that's a little more broad, understanding that some of you may be interested in not just applying for internships at Bank of America, but potentially in other industries too. So candidate qualities that we look for an interest in the banking industry. And let's take a look out. So let's say you're interested in fashion, right, which is a different industry altogether. And you're interested in applying for a fashion house that's headquartered maybe either in New York or Paris. Similar deal here, right? So the interviewers are going to look at your application, they're going to look at your interview, and they're going to wonder what your interest in the industry is. And so it really starts there. And that's one of the first things that you really want to be able to convey at every point, from your resume to your application throughout the interviews, to anyone who you happen to have a conversation with. Another thing that we'll look for is relevant coursework and experience. And this is important to call out too, because a lot of times students in particular worry that they don't have enough work experience to be a viable candidate for an internship. And I just kind of want to dispel that myth, because the truth is, internships are intended to be your very first professional work experience. So it's a myth to assume that you need to have work experience to get a job that requires no work experience. So what's more important is how you're spending time in the classroom and what extracurriculars you're dedicating your time and energy to. Those are the things that will come up in conversation. And we'll also be assessing your interpersonal and communication skills, as well as your analytical abilities. There are soft skills that I think people look for along the way, and really this happens before you even get to the interview stage. I think during the networking process, and as you're meeting with recruiters and people throughout the company, people will be checking for your ability to perform critical thinking, how central teamwork is to the way that you operate, your leadership skills, your assertiveness, and even your integrity and judgment. So let's talk a little bit about tips that we can provide for how to master the actual interview process. So we mentioned that virtual interviews really are the norm right now for almost every industry around the world. And so we talked about the platform that we and some other employers use called HireVue, but it's really important to familiarize yourself with all the possible tools that you might come across during the hiring process. For HireVue in particular, it is really important, I think, for candidates to take the time to practice and really be comfortable with the tool, because recording yourself rather than having a live two-way communication where you can rely on things like body language and cues from how someone responds to, your answer while you're delivering it, it can just be a little bit challenging, and it might not feel natural the first couple of times you're recording yourself. So it's really important to practice your responses. You want to make sure that you're familiar with your background and your resume so that you can very quickly respond to the prompts in the time that's allotted. And then you want to make sure that you are entering prepared, right? So checking your surroundings, making sure that you can see yourself on your camera, make sure that your Wi-Fi doesn't give you any issues. And you want to make sure that basically you're eliminating anything that might be a potential distraction from the final product of what you want to submit. It's also just important to make sure that you've done the practice so that you're able to respond to prompts and answer the questions in the time that's allotted, because you do not want to get cut off before you're able to actually answer a question. And then during the interview, like I just mentioned, you want to use your time wisely, so you're making sure that every answer has a beginning, middle, and end, so that you're not getting cut off. And you want to make sure you're staying calm. You want to make sure that, this is a reflection really of what you would be like if you were able to meet folks in person. So you don't want to get derailed by the fact that, you're recording yourself speak. Be mindful of your body language, and then you also want to make sure that you're dressing professionally. The best rule of thumb is to just dress the same way you would if you were coming into the office to meet with the team in person. And dressing professionally might look different depending on maybe the company that you're interviewing with or even the role. All right, so this is a model that we like to talk through to sort of explain why employers tend to use behavioral interview questions as the most common type of question. So this is called the Iceberg Model, and it describes the way that employers will use probing questions to understand and uncover competencies within a candidate. So there are certain things when you submit your application that employers will know at the surface level. And in black and white on paper, an interviewer will be able to know what your skills and your knowledge are, right? We know where you go to school, we know your GPA, we know what classes you've taken, we know your knowledge and your skills. Now, what's more difficult to identify and what lies beneath the quote-unquote waterline are the things that you see listed here on this slide. So values, self-image, traits, and motives. And so those are things that will really help a hiring manager or a recruiter better understand whether or not you might be a fit for a role and potentially how you might fit into potential future career opportunities. So let's talk a little bit more about behavioral interviews and a recommended model for structuring responses to questions when asked a behavioral interview question. So when an interviewer asks you for a story about your past experiences, there are three things that they'll be looking to assess: what the situation was, what your behavior was, and what was the outcome as a result of your behavior. And to further define each one of those three broad areas, the situation may be a task or a conflict that you faced or a deadline that you had to meet. The behavior is the combination of your thoughts and your actions. And then the outcome is the results and the lessons that you learned. And I want to say here for students, this is really important because, like I mentioned before, we're looking to hire candidates who can demonstrate competencies, but are not necessarily showing up with prior work history. So your ability to demonstrate your ability to learn from past experiences is really important because that will indicate your ability to be able to learn the role that we're hiring you to learn. This slide's a helpful one because in trying to provide answers that cover the situation, behavior, and outcome, there's a model that we recommend you practice with. And so that model is called CARL, C-A-R-L, and it stands for Conflict, Action, Result, and a lesson learned. And you all might be familiar with another model that a lot of people like to use to practice behavioral interviews called the STAR method. And that's the situation, thought, action, and result model. But what that model tends to lack is that lesson learned component. So Carl can be really helpful in really making sure that each one of your examples is ending with what you gained from it and walking away. So a good example of some questions and the way that questions within an interview might be structured are mapped out here at the bottom of this slide. Typically, an interview will begin with very general questions, right? So your interviewer might ask you for a brief summary of your background and your interest in the role. They might go a little further to ask you to tell them a little bit about the company. And so that's kind of your opportunity to both walk them through your resume and then let them know why you applied and why you think you're a fit for the position. And then the bottom three questions are a little more behavioral. And so these questions that we chose for this were, tell me about a time when you led a team. Tell me about a time when you had to make a tough decision. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake. And so each one of those questions will ask you to rely on a previous experience that you had. And you'll want to structure the story with the beginning, middle, and end. And it might be most effective to use a model like Carl, where you're able to explain the situation from beginning to end and end with what it is that you gained from the challenge that was faced. All right, so with that, at the very beginning, I promised to leave you all with some information that you can walk away with in case you're interested in potentially applying and pursuing career opportunities with Bank of America. So this summer, July 1st, applications will open for our 2022 programs. If you are interested in applying for more than one program, the good news is that you can apply for up to 3. This is a really great time to start doing that research now because like you saw in the earlier slide when we were talking about how the roles will align to different candidate profiles, whether you're a big thinker, a market maker, or decision maker, there's going to be a number of roles that you might be a viable candidate for. So it's really important to start early and narrow that list down so that you don't run out of options, right? So if you have narrowed your list down to 12 programs you're thinking about, but you can only submit for 3, you want to make sure you're only picking the top 3. Top advice here that we have for you is to make sure that you have perfected your resume before you're ready to apply. Best advice is to make sure you save it as a PDF. And we always recommend that because when you're sending around maybe a Word document, there's always a chance that it becomes unformatted or someone who's forwarding it to another person might accidentally insert typos. And you can easily avoid that by making sure that your document is saved as a PDF before it goes out. And lastly here, campus.bankofamerica.com is really a great resource in case you're interested in learning about any of the programs that we hire for. But it's also just a great place to start because you can learn a lot about our company culture and the work that our teams are doing. So highly recommend that you take a look if you're considering applying for a role because you definitely don't need to wait until July 1 to get started on that. So with that, I will wrap it up, but I want to thank you all so much for joining us. And hopefully our recruiting team will have a chance to see your application and potentially speak with you at some point during the recruiting season. Thank you all so much. Bye.